Hi, everyone. This is Luke Johnson from Noetic, the Humanities Teaching app. And joining me today is my good friend, Robert Schut. And we're going to be talking about a text of Kierkegaard's that is little known and, well, has different titles depending on the translation that you are reading. I consulted the Walter Lowry translation, so I'm prepared to talk about the unchangeableness of God. But Bob may have a different translation, which could be read as the changelessness of God. Did you read the changelessness of God or the unchangeableness of God? I'm still not sure how I'm going to label this on the app and SoundCloud and YouTube.
I read the immutability of God, which is
Oh,
the third version. No,
what's
no, I no unchangeableness of God is what I read, but we'll talk about immutability in a minute. But yeah, the unchangeableness of God by Soren Kierkegaard.
yeah, and so if anyone's curious, they can find a copy of this on Internet Archive. That's where I found mine. Um, and there was a slight communication mix up. I think Bob thought I was going to lead today. But he is always prepared, so he's going to take charge. Maybe I should try to give a little bit of background information. Let me see if I can get this right. I want to make sure that we're on the same page about this. The little bit that I have committed to memory about this text. I believe you can find this in for self-examination, that this is an essay that is within that larger collection. If anyone has the book for self-examination, you should be able to find the unchangeableness of God. And from what I recall, this is labeled a discourse within Kierkegaard's authorial history. But am I misremembering this? Did he not give this as a sermon?
It did say that it was a sermon. It's hard to picture him giving this as a sermon, but that's what my understanding is, that it was a sermon that he gave to the congregation for that short period of time that he was actually a pastor in the country.
Yeah, which is really, really cool. I don't think we've ever covered one of his air quotes sermons. Here, so for those who are watching on YouTube, sermons. And I believe, and Bob, I'm going to have you fact check me on this. Wasn't it? Did he deliver it, or was it published about 2 months before he died in 1855? Do I have that correct?
I try to remember when it was published.
I
That
can
may
look it
be
up for certain.
That sounds about right. It sounds about right. So
Okay.
yeah, you can check that out
before we get into it, what did you think about this text?
I enjoyed it. I enjoyed it very much. I think that he's consistent. I think is one of the things that I really like about Kierkegaard is he's very consistent about his ideas, and he uses a lot of phrases that he uses elsewhere. So it's not like he's starting from scratch each time. He's already got this ideology perhaps in his mind of what he wants to say, and he pulls together these ideas that he's had previously, that he's even used in other works, as you'll soon see. And so I see this connectivity with this particular work with a lot of other works. Did you see the same thing? I mean, it's not the strange work that he's got hanging out there that doesn't seem to relate to anything else. This definitely is Kierkegaard. It relates to his other works very well.
Yeah. I completely agree. And I'm going off sorenkierkegaard.org right here for a little bit of background information on the text. Called A Religious Discourse was actually a sermon that Kierkegaard preached in the Church of the Citadel on May 18th, 1851. Preface is dated May 5th, 1854, Kierkegaard's 41st birthday. It was published in 1855 during the height of Kierkegaard's attack on Christendom, just 2 months before his death, between installments 7 and 8 of The Moment. Okay, so to summarize, if I have this right, he gave the sermon in 1851. There was a preface written for it in 1854. It was published in 1855. So the delivering of the sermon and the publication of it differ. And this was not a posthumous work. It was published 2 months before he died. So that may sound very complicated, but do we have some clarity on the subject now?
Yeah, I think that's good. So this is at the end of his career, end of his writing career, pretty much. So that's the important thing, I think, to take into consideration here. Also, I think it's important the fact that it was written as a sermon is different, because he's writing for this to be heard, for this to be spoken, rather than read, and that does change the dynamics. So
it's very beautiful. It's very beautiful. I made in order for me to prepare for today, and I highly recommend this as sort of an academic life hack for people, is to make your own audiobooks as a way to drill it into your brain. I got a chance to listen to my own audiobook of this for about 3 times before we went on the air. So, and that was really helpful. Making it audible really brings out the beauty of the text.
Okay. Well, I guess I could begin now then. And I'm going to start off with, since what this is about, since it was a sermon, sermons usually are about scripture. And this particular case is not different. It's about James, the letter of James, chapter 1, verse 17 through 21. It says, and if this sounds familiar to you, it's because we've done this before in our in one of other podcasts here. We kind of covered these scriptures. But it says, every good gift and every perfect gift is from above, and cometh down from the Father of lights, with whom is no variableness, neither shadow of turning. Of his own will begat he us with the word of truth, that we should be a kind of first fruits of his creatures. Wherefore, my beloved brethren, let every man be swift to hear, slow to speak, and slow to wrath. For the wrath of man worketh not the righteousness of God. Wherefore, lay apart all filthiness and superfluity of naughtiness, and receive with meekness the engrafted word, which is able to save your souls.
So good.
Yeah. And he's not going to really cover the whole thing here. He's really taking a piece of this, as we'll see, and cover mainly. So I kind of open up with a question here. What does it mean to be unchangeable or immutable? And the reason I'm using the word immutable is this is the term that's used in theology. The immutability of God sounds a little fancier than the unchangeableness, but that's what it means. But exactly what does it mean that God is unchangeable, right?
Oh, because I would know, right? Because it's a very easy thing for me to conceptualize and to tell everyone else about. It's a really easy concept to get out there.
Yeah. Well, what do we at least talk? We may not understand it or experience it, most certainly, but it's referring to his unchangeable or without variation in character. And it's important to understand it, that it's pretty specific. As we'll see this again later on as we develop his thought. Man is by nature rash and therefore needs to listen to God. And this is a very true statement. We're rash. We do what we want to do. And being rash, I think, is a nice way of saying that we just go follow after our own will, regardless of where it takes us or what it costs. And that's being rash. We don't necessarily follow what is good for us, but rather what we want. He says now God is unchangeable, but man is not. And this is what makes man corruptible. And we have to keep in mind that this text is not about man's mutability or changeableness, but about God's immutability. And what he's trying to do is make sure that we don't turn this text into something about man, but rather this is something about God. Man's changeableness, the fact that we change daily, is not the issue here. It's only brought up to make a comparison to God and his unchangeableness.
So can I interject for a second?
Absolutely.
So, and maybe I'm jumping the gun on this. Probably am. And you're probably going to say, hold on, Luke, I'm going to get to that in about a half hour. But if that's the case, I just want to posit this and we can bracket it and come back to it. So I really like this text because it takes for granted the unchangeableness of God and what that means in terms to the the changeableness of man and sort of our comprehension of it and the existential dread and fear and that an unchangeable object has in relationship to man and how we ought to comport ourselves to it. And I like the exploration of these themes. My concern as a Christian is that I wonder how compatible this notion of God's unchangeableness is with the Bible. The Bible seems to portray a God that changes in some ways. And so it gets into this hair-splitting conversation about what is a change, and if there's an aspect of God that is eternal and unchangeable, and if there are aspects of God that are reactive and are subject to change. And that's not necessarily a contradiction. But just for instance, like, the movement from Yahweh to Jesus Christ and through all the different eschatological periods, from the Judaic law to the period of grace to the tribulation to the millennial reign, whatever, we seem to be presented with a different version of God. But that doesn't mean that there couldn't be some sort of core character of God that remains untouched, immutable, and unchangeable. But I see this tension between what Kierkegaard's trying to portray God as and what the Bible portrays God as. Because there's all these episodes in the Bible where God sorrows, he gets upset, he delays the second coming, all these sorts of things. He does seem to change his mind in some ways. So how would you? So that's it. That's all I'm going to say. That was sort of my big essay question: is how we reconcile the unchangeableness of God with the God of the Bible.
Okay, and that's why I actually opened up by saying that this unchangeableness of God is one where it speaks about his lack or without variation in character. His identity as God is unchangeable. But we will get to this a little bit more in about a half an hour.
Okay, fair answer.
So we will bracket it, as he said, we will bracket it because I do have a conclusion, and this is kind of in part of my conclusion.
Okay.
Okay. So now there's a term that's brought up here where God is called the Father of Lights. I don't remember.
Love that.
Yeah, and I don't remember if we spoke about that or not, but before I kind of give you my opinion about this, why do you think, or did that make you think about when you talked about God as the Father of Lights? Did you think of him like the Father who created stars, or did you think of him in a different way?
Well, when we first covered this subject, okay, when you and I first looked at like the 18 upbuilding discourses, I believe, where Kierkegaard was referencing these passages to James.
Yeah.
I saw the world differently. I saw the world like everyone else sees the world. Right? And I'm not going to look. People who are smart will be able to infer what I'm saying here, okay? I do not see the world the same way when we first talked about these passages from James. I personally have adopted an older cosmology, a Hebraic cosmology. And underneath that cosmology, right, the stars are not suns. And the sun and the moon are not fiery balls of gas and orbiting rocks. Okay? Mm-hmm. They're different things, right? They're lights. And there is some talk in Jude and other places that stars and wandering stars, or what we would call planets, may actually be entities of some kind. So when we talk about the Father of lights, I mean, there could be a sense where these heavenly bodies could belong to a realm filled with celestial entities. I'm probably saying too much, and therefore it would be proper to say that God is, in a sense, the father of these lights, that these could actually be beings in some sense.
Okay.
Now, I know I just probably said a bunch of stuff I wasn't supposed to say, but that would be a way to reconcile that passage.
Well, that's how people know this is live, Luke. We could, but I tended to go a little bit more metaphysical with this after I thought about this.
Go for it.
And I'm thinking that perhaps because he reveals all truth, which is considered to be light in the New Testament, mostly in the New, that God is the Father of all that reveals truth. So I tended to see this more in that metaphysical idea that God is the Father of all truth. So all light, anything that we consider to be light, would be he is the Father of. Now it's true, we could take it either way, but we're kind of giving two different options, not necessarily, and they're not disjointed, they're not exclusive. I mean, you can believe both. I mean, certainly.
My only concern about the metaphysical interpretation, back to the text, because that's the thing we need to really be focused on, is that within modernity, there's a big obsession with enlightenment, right? There's a big obsession with asking for more light, asking for greater and greater clarity, but this is a methodology used in occult and esoteric circles, and that little caveat that may not be necessarily something we want to myself painted into a corner by saying this, but enlightenment is often detached from God.
Yeah.
Enlightenment.
And it certainly was in those days. It was definitely revelation is more what we speak of today. For Christians would speak more revelation from God rather than enlightenment, as though it's something God gives us and then leaves us with this enlightenment. No, it's definitely attached to God.
That's an interesting discussion about the difference between revelation and enlightenment. I don't think John on Patmos was said, I got enlightened.
Right.
I don't think John was like, and then he's like, oh, God enlightened me. No, he's like, no, God showed me a vision.
Right. It's not called the Book of Enlightenment. It's called the Book of Revelation, right?
Exactly.
Okay. So then he quotes again from this, and he said, well, why should we be slow to speak? It says one of the things James says is to be slow to speak. So why should we be slow to speak?
What? I can tell you why.
Yeah, let me hear it.
Because we don't know. Because we don't know anything.
We don't know.
And we need to. we don't know anything, and we need to listen. That's like we need to consider something before. What's the passage about I'll find it. But I think we need to do more listening and less talking and professing.
Okay.
I can tell you there's something very foolish about all the professing that we do.
Well, according to James, since we're in James, in the context of James, what he says about speaking in chapters 3, verse 8 through 12, is he says, but the tongue can no man tame. It is an unruly evil, full of deadly poison. Therewith bless we God, even the Father, and therewith curse we men, which are made after the similitude of God. Out of the mouth proceedeth blessing and cursing. My brethren, these things ought not to be so. Doth the fountain send forth at the same place sweet water and bitter? Can the fig tree, my brethren, bear olive berries? Either a vine, figs? So can no fountain both yield salt water and fresh. So James didn't speak very highly of the tongue, which symbolizes speaking. So we have to be very careful what we say, because in one minute we're blessing and in the next minute we're cursing. we are not consistent when it comes to our character as God is with his.
But don't you think that's because we're not grounded in the truth? And when we're not grounded in the truth, we're erratic and undisciplined?
That's absolutely right. It's absolutely right. But as we'll find out here in another 2 sentences, we don't even understand what's good. And that's the reason we're all over the place. We must become holy so that we can perform our ministries for God from a purity of heart. And here, again, he brings in the idea of the purity of heart, the other work that we did. So the point is to become, and this is where we always have to make the distinction, and I have to be careful because when I teach in our Bible study, there's a difference between being self-righteous and being holy. The Pharisees were self-righteous, okay? They focused on being right for their own benefit, for their own reward. Being holy is being purified, having a pure heart so we can perform our ministries properly. And so we're seeking holiness, not so much self-righteousness, or not at all self-righteousness.
Do you think, like, I think both you and I try to be holy individuals. You're better at it than me.
I've got, yeah, go ahead.
So you and I try to be holy individuals, whatever we think that means, right? And that's an interesting question about what it means to be holy. I don't know. I think it just means
let me give you
I just think it means that to allow God's will to be the thing that
and you see,
that orchestrate.
There's a big difference.
But the question I want to ask, and then I'll shut up, is can that desire to be holy and to allow God's will to take over your life, can that be interpreted as self-righteousness? Because I can see the difference between self-righteousness and holiness a mile away. But do you think these things get conflated to maybe the non-believer's eyes, and they think we're just all like have these martyr complexes and things that we're better than everyone else?
Yeah, I think they may think, like you said, we're splitting hairs, we're saying the same thing, but we're not. And the big key word here is the difference between what you said, trying and letting. When we try to be holy and try to be righteous, then we're Pharisaical. But when we let God be holy in us, that's when we're truly being holy. So the whole, and this takes a lifetime to learn. It took me many years to learn the difference between trying and letting. God wants us to be holy, and he's trying to make us holy. All we have to do is let him do it by letting him have his will in us. The more we try, the more we exercise our own will, and the further we get from holiness. So it's really a matter of almost stepping back and saying, do it, God. Just have your way with me. Let me be who you want me to be. I'm done trying. So, and
just to connect it to what we were talking about earlier, enlightenment seems to be more in that trying category. that I'm going to perfect myself towards enlightenment, whereas the whole holiness things is to just allow God to take over and run your life.
Yeah. Oh, that's an excellent connection that you made there, because it seems that enlightenment is the result of our trying. It's how we give ourselves a sense of satisfaction and purpose, that we are enlightened because of rather than something God did.
Right.
So he talks about the simple sage of antiquity. Okay. Now look, who's the simple sage of antiquity?
Well, it came to mind was good old Socrates.
Okay, actually, right? Socrates, he's always. Well, we were just talking about Socrates a little earlier about the Socratic method and how he got in such trouble by questioning how people thought, what they thought was their foundational thinking. But
Bob, if they imprison me and make me drink hemlock, and you try to break me out of the prison or pay off the guards or whatever, I will let you, and I will escape.
Okay. Okay.
For the record.
I will be there, my friend, for you. Don't worry about it.
Yeah.
Now, we don't understand God's will because we are not good by nature. This is really a very basic concept he's speaking about here, about the goodness of our nature. There is no goodness in our nature. We do not truly understand what is good for us because we do not understand what is good. And even Jesus says this when the man asked Jesus, he said, "Good Rabbi, what must I do to inherit the kingdom?" He says, "Why do you call me good?" Even Jesus was reticent to have someone think of him in those terms because he knew it was misleading to them. They were looking at him in the human concept of a rabbi, and he did not want to make the issue confused. So we tend to speak less about God and more about what's wrong with this world. We need to focus more upon the unchangeableness of God, as did the apostles. So sometimes I think he's saying here that we are a bunch of complainers. We complain about the world, not that it doesn't deserve to be complained about, but we get obsessed with it. We get, and the way I like to phrase it is, we get distracted by these things. Our mission isn't to complain about the world. It's to brag about the unchangeableness of God. And that's what the apostles did. The apostles didn't really complain about Rome this and Rome that, right? They didn't, and if anybody had a reason to complain about the politics, they certainly did.
Yeah.
But today we're all caught up on the bandwagon complaining about things. But rather we should, in a sense, count our blessings. But even not even that. We should be focused upon God and his character and his unchangeableness. That's what should govern our thinking. So our distractions of the world can reveal how distracted we can become about worldly things. It's not only politics, though. It's sports and finances and you name it, business and so forth. We can become so obsessed with those issues that we stop looking at God's unchangeableness and focus more on man's changeableness.
Can I offer some advice to the listenership just real quick?
Yes.
Yeah, stop obsessing about that stuff because it's totally rigged. It's not real. It's entertainment. It's entertainment, people.
Well, it is that final word clinches it. It is predetermined. So as much as we complain about it, it's not going to change it.
If you saw that, did you see the Saints-Vikings game? Did you see the ending of the Saints-Vikings game? It's rigged.
It's rigged. Okay, so in order to do this, though, in order to see the eternality of God, the unchangeableness of God, we must not look backward, but hasten towards eternity with stronger strides. I like this quote because I like the idea he talks about we must hasten towards eternity with stronger strides. It's so encouraging. And it gives us such a picture of, instead of creeping along towards eternity, it's to just take full strides, almost running towards eternity. And this is the picture that the gospel actually gives about Jesus entering into Jerusalem on the famous Palm Sunday.
Yeah, the donkey.
Yeah, even prior to that, it shows that his disciples were kind of walking into Jerusalem, but he was leading them, and you can kind of picture him just almost marching at a fast pace to get into Jerusalem to get this accomplished, to get his mission accomplished. And that's the same attitude we have to take in our missions. We shouldn't tiptoe and take little baby steps. We should just take wide, strong strides as we enter into our own ministries. Confidence. That shows and exudes confidence, not only in God, but to others. It shows others that we are confident in what we're doing and where we're going. I wish I had more of that myself. I wish I had that earlier in life. And, hopefully I will have it later in life as well.
I think you got it. I think you got it now.
I'm catching on to it now, Luke. It's a little late, but better late than never. Now he talks about the omnipotence of God. God is not only unchangeable, he's omnipotent. Omnipotent means all powerful. But we'll talk about that in a minute. It means that God is all powerful. He created this world visible and yet made himself invisible.
Well, except for something that happened 2,000 years ago.
Yeah, well, this is the comes under the revelation, the manifestation of God. Very difficult concept, but one of these days we'll get to it.
Pretty easy for me to comprehend. No problems here.
So he
That's
says,
a joke.
Okay, he says, this is a quotation from him. In the world of events, he is present everywhere in every moment. And this is a real important concept to get, that God is present everywhere in every moment. And this is a great description of the idea behind the very name of God, Yahweh.
So let me ask you this. Because Kierkegaard's got some very poetic language when he talks about this, like as if like reality is a cloak that God tries on, and can disrobe and try on new cloaks and things like that. So I think it's a very profound way at looking at it. But is there any way that this could end up supporting a pantheistic hypothesis? If God is in everything, God is in every moment?
Not really, because pantheism is God is all things.
I'm just asking.
Yeah, God. To define pantheism would be God is all things, and all things are God.
Right.
And so this is a little bit different than that. We're not really saying that all things are God. We're not saying man is part of God, and God is part of man. This is only in a certain circumstance here. Let me go back over it again. He's present everywhere and in every moment, which is a little different than saying, the basis of pantheism.
Yeah.
But it might give, it's a good thing you brought that up, because it may give the idea that God is trying to reveal his omnipresence to the world, and the world is misinterpreting it. So this may be where the origin of pantheism comes from, is that God is everywhere, but they misunderstand it because they don't have the mind that goes along with the understanding. Sometimes it may seem like the world is unchangeable. Sometimes it seems like, ever since we're born, the oceans are still the oceans, the mountains are still the mountains. Things don't really change. Even 2,000 years, Israel looks about the same. When you look at the hills and the mountains, probably looks a lot the same as it did in Jesus's day. But Heraclitus said that you can't put your foot into the same river twice. You remember that from basic philosophy, Luke?
Yeah, it's ringing a bell.
Okay. But my favorite one is Cratylus, which few people realize. Cratylus says that he stated that you can't even put your foot into the same river once.
Yeah, this was a really heated subject for the pre-Socratics. I'm trying to. The Eleatics, I believe, were pretty obsessed with some of this stuff too. I'll have to don't quote me on that. I'll have to look into it, and I'll have to figure out who were the Eleatics. I'm going to look that up real quick while you talk.
Okay, so the point is here. I just wanted to show that even ancient philosophers understood the changeableness of the world. They knew that the world changed, so much so that that the stream changes from moment to moment. So Heraclitus is one of my most favorite quotes. So he also tells us that God is clarity because he's pure, and man is dim because he's defiled. Because of this, we're subject to change. And we're changed for the good. We're changed by God's light that shines upon us and reveals. But who can reveal something to God? So this changeableness of what can we say to God that would change him? What can we do to God that would change him for who he is and what he is? Really, you can't surprise God with anything.
No.
Because he's all knowable. So we seek this. I have 2 points here. We seek to have an understanding of and with God's will, but we can only have it moment by moment and not as something finished and complete. God reveals our ministry even moment by moment so that we don't begin to believe that we know something apart from God. And so this is important. This is something that I've come to understand that was very helpful for me, because a lot of times when we pray and we say, God, what is your will for me? What do you want me to do? And as though God is going to give you a particular job and say, this is what I want you to do. You go get it done and I'll get back with you later. This is not like our normal jobs at work where, our ministry is just something finite, has a beginning and an end. Our ministries are being subsumed in the will of God, so that every moment we live in his will, we fulfill our ministries and we fulfill our destiny. So it's not something that has a beginning and an end, is delivered to us, something that we can almost take apart from God. It's something that we have to stay in every moment. And that's a little different concept than many people have that I've known. So we must will the will of God, which is what the whole conclusion to his book, The Purity of Heart, was, is to will the will of God. So he talks about...
Can I share what I found real quick?
Good opportunity, yeah.
Just because I think it will kind of help with this massive question that I asked you at the beginning, and how we might want to distinguish it from what these pre-Socratic philosophers believed. So I mentioned the Eleatics. Some of the individuals that are part of the pre-Socratic Eleatic school of thought are like Xenophanes and Parmenides and people like this. And they took up this idea of discussing the philosophy of motion, and they were against sort of the early physicalist doctrine, but they were also against Heraclitus's idea that everything was just change. And just real quick from Wikipedia, the main doctrines of the Eleatics were evolved in opposition to the theories of the early physicalist philosophers, who explained all existence in terms of primary matter, and to the theory of Heraclitus, which declared that all existence may be summed up as perpetual change. I kind of already said that. The Eleatics maintained that the true explanation of things lies in the conception of a universal unity of being. According to their doctrine, the senses cannot cognize this unity because the reports are inconsistent. It is by thought alone that we can pass beyond the false appearances of sense and arrive at the knowledge of being, at the fundamental truth that the all is one. Furthermore, there can be no creation, for being cannot come from non-being, because a thing cannot arise from that which is different from it. They argued that errors on this point commonly arise from the ambiguous use of the verb to be, which may imply actual physical existence or merely be the linguistic copula which connects subject and predicate. So just what's interesting about this, and are trying to get our head around everything, is that the Eleatic school seemed to acknowledge that there was something beyond sense perception, that that not all not every man was identifiable with the thing that was behind it. But unlike Kierkegaard and the Christian idea, they did not believe in a creation. It seemed that this oneness had some sort of eternality to it. It gets very complicated, but we're seeing in this conversation about the unchangeableness of God and reconciling the unchangeableness of God with a creation, and there being multiple realities, the eternal reality of God and the changeable creation that you and I are a part of. We can see how this can be brought into conversation with these pre-Socratic ideas, and may have been even influenced to some degree. So that's I just wanted to put that in there.
Oh, good,
it may make things unnecessarily confusing, but we learned something nonetheless.
No, that's good. Thank you. Good point to interject that too. He talks about man standing before a mountain, thinking about climbing it until he dies. In other words, he sits in front of a mountain and he keeps looking at it, saying, one of these days I'm going to climb this mountain. And he goes by and he gets older and he gets older. And now he's too old to climb it. He's changed, but the mountain almost appears as though it didn't change because the mountain is still standing there. He then says that sometimes we think that God is not hearing us or that he's not making himself known. He seems, and this is important because I think many people go through this time of their life when they pray and they don't get an answer to prayer. And they start to think God has abandoned them. And so I was very interested to hear his answer to that. And he says that he seems to be telling us that it's better that God is still rather than give us what we deserve. So the reason that he's so quiet is because he's unchangeable. So this idea that God is still, in the sense that, as we were talking earlier, you and I, Luke, that God is not necessarily, he's unchangeable, but that doesn't mean he doesn't move. He doesn't move, he's inactive. God is always active.
In the Old Testament, he made all sorts of racket in the Old Testament. And if we move into a new eschaton, he's going to make all kinds of racket again. You know what I'm saying? We just may temporarily be in a period where he's like, yeah, I'm going to chill out for a little while. Why don't you guys see what it's like to do this without me directing you so closely? See what happens when you do it on your own. See how far you get.
Well, yeah, and faith and patience are something that we learn by that method. We don't learn by God constantly, pulling us by the nose and pointing us exactly what he wants us to do. Sometimes, not sometimes, most of the time, he kind of points. And we have to learn how to react to God's pointing us. And it's a very subtle thing, but in my life, those quiet periods are times when God is saying, now I'm teaching you about patience. Now I'm teaching you how to wait, which is what we don't learn. We do not learn how to wait.
We don't take Patience 101 as a freshman survey course in college.
No, we do not. If anything,
don't take self-control.
No, we don't. And this is God's territory. He teaches us to wait. And it seems so harsh to us. It's like one of the loudest things in a conversation is silence. Monica and I were watching a movie last night, and it's a movie. It's a new movie, but it's done in black and white. And these are people who just look like everyday people. They don't look like movie stars. And the dialogue is exceptional because one person will say something and the other person just stands there and looks at them. And you're thinking, come on, hurry up, say something, hurry up, answer. And they don't. They wait and wait and wait to the point of being uncomfortable. And I thought that was such brilliant dialogue because we're not used to that anymore. We're used to the texting back and forth, the speed of light kind of communications. But this movie brought back conversation. So it was very meaningful to me. And this is what God does. Sometimes we ask God a question and we're saying, okay, we're ready for the answer. God, I don't hear you. I'm waiting. And God says, you're going to wait a whole lot longer, but you need to learn how to wait.
What movie was this?
It was Thunderbird Beach, I think it was called. I don't think you ever heard of it. It was on Netflix. I think it was called Thunderbird Beach.
I don't have a TV, so you're just zooming ahead with the technology there, Bob. I saw a movie that recently, and I'll let you get back to it real quick, that I would highly recommend to people. It's one of the better ones I've seen this year. It's called The Shape of Water.
Oh yeah,
And
Monica just mentioned that to me.
yeah, it was really great. A mute woman falls in love with a merman, and neither one of them can, and he's considered to be a monster, and she's sort of part of the underclass of society because she's mute and she has this disability, and they don't have a language, they don't have a spoken language to speak, and they're sort of written out of the society, yet they fall in love. It's just interesting if you want to contemplate how silence can be part of a conversation.
Oh yeah,
Yeah, I think it's very interesting.
how
Plus,
timely,
it
how
also,
timely. Yeah.
yeah, it also occurs in a deep underground bunker too. So there's that element.
Yeah. So man must change in order to feel God's presence, or rather, he must be willing to change. This is something I think is important to grasp. This idea is that in order to really feel God's presence, God is not going to change. We have to do the changing.
Oh yeah.
But even if we don't know how to change, it's important that at least we're willing to change. So when people say, well, how do you begin your walk? At least will to be willing to change. Say, I'm ready to be changed into whatever you want me to be. That willingness is
But
extremely important.
but we should probably elaborate on it. It's not just like, okay, God, I'm ready to change. Like you had, I mean, the willingness to change has to come from like, I have exhausted my means of understanding and will.
Yeah.
I'm done.
Yeah.
I can't, like my experience with this is like, I got to the point where I encountered information that I could no longer explain. And I was like, okay, my finite mind is done here. Take over,
Yeah.
God, but I think that happens with other people in emotional ways. Like, I don't
Well,
know. I was reading a testimonial very recently about a guy who fought in Vietnam, and while he was fighting in Vietnam, and it was the that pushed him to the willingness to listen to God. Everybody's got a different thing that pushes them to the willingness to listen to God.
right. And it's also important. I left one very major thing out here that I was just jotting down here, is that this isn't that we make the change in our willingness. God is at work in us to make us want to change our willingness. So this is not something we initiate. This is something God initiates.
But then,
And that's,
but this is going to get into questions about election and
I know.
predestination.
Yes, it
Because
may.
then people are like, well, why isn't God working through me?
What does God what?
Do you think God is working through everyone, and that ultimately He's going to find a way?
I don't think he's necessarily working through everyone, but he's working on everyone.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think his spirit is, that's what you just said. He is everywhere. And I think that's what God wants. It says that God really wants everyone to know him. He really wants everyone to believe in him. So that tells me that he's working on everyone to make it happen.
Yeah. Because we're all his lost sheep, right? Doesn't he want to win all of them back?
Yes, he does. Yes, he does. Now, sin does not, this is another quote, sin does not diminish through time, which is this is our finite, changeable minds. We change our opinions over time. It does not become less sin nor deserve less punishment simply because we did this sin 10 years ago. Doesn't make it any less, because God does not forget anything.
See, now this is one of the parts of the text I was like, hold up here. And I got to ask this question here, Bob.
Yes.
Kierkegaard was like, oh, yeah, you may forget about the sin that you did 10 years ago, but guess what? God, in his omniscience, he totally remembers that very naughty thing you did.
Yes, he does.
But do you think Kierkegaard is right biblically on this? Because this is a question about what it means to be saved, right? Like when you repent, right? Is God still keeping track of my sins, or does he forget about them at that moment? is God still holding on to those?
I'm going to defer until a little.
Does my sin still follow me even after I repent?
The short answer is no, but there's a longer answer, which we'll get to in the end.
I know.
Half hour, I'm pushing that half hour a little further out there, Luke.
You didn't inspect the interrogation of Luke Johnson.
I try to, but you always surprise me. So what God is trying to teach us is to be in agreement with his will. He's not trying to make us better people, as many might preach to us. This is where I have a hard time with today's preaching. Today's preaching is done to make us better people in some, not everybody, but in some aspects. This is what we go into thinking, how can I become a better person? This is a difference that we really need to discuss. Christianity is not the power of positive thinking or the secrets to success. It's a transforming of our will into his in order to give him glory. It is not a transforming of us to bring glory to us and success to us. It is to bring glory to God. And we've got to change that. I'm not in this to become a better person. That I gave up. But that I had to give up a long time ago. I'm in this to make people aware of God's glory now and his righteousness and his love for them. That's what I'm in it for now. I can't say I didn't make that mistake, though, because I did make that mistake. And hopefully I've learned.
I guess, but the question is, are they really inseparable goals, right? Like when you're trying to make people aware of God, the transformation ultimately is going to lead to a better world.
Yeah, but I'm talking more about goals. Our goal is not to become a better person in all this. Our goal is to glorify God. The fact we become better people is this byproduct of truly glorifying God. And I've noticed that in my life, I've become a better person, not because I wanted to be a better person, and that was my goal, but because I want to glorify God to others. And that has changed me. So that was how.
Side note, you mentioned the power of positive thinking. I've never read it, but I guess that was written by Norman Vincent Peale. Is that right?
Well, yeah, it was certainly popularized by him. Yes.
So side note, that's Trump's pastor, or was his pastor.
Yes, it was. Yes, it was. His father's pastor, I think it was, but he used to drag him to church and make him listen. So it worked for him, made him a success. I guess.
There are a lot of things that Trump had going for him. It's kind of hard to mess up in life when you start off with $1 million loan.
Yeah, maybe a little harder, maybe. Now, I do say here, or he does say here, that God remembers who we are for eternity, because forgetting is mutable. Forgetting is changeableness. So God remembers everything about us. Okay, so now I'm going to have to kind of put that in context here as we go. He can remember us for eternity. But the caveat is if he wills to do so. Now, what people have not taken into consideration when they use terms like God is omnipotent, and these are human terms. We define God as being omnipotent, omniscient, and omnipresent. He can do anything. He is everywhere, and he knows everything, period. That's how we define God. But I don't believe that's the whole story, and I don't believe that's the correct definition of God. One reason is because we have logical conundrums. Therefore, is God in hell? Can God make a rock so heavy that he can't move it? These are the problems when we try to put God into a box and define him. And this is...
Do you want me to answer those questions?
Sure, take a shot at it.
Okay, can God make a rock so heavy that he can't lift it? I mean, that question would be sort of absurd on the face of it, right? Because...
But it challenges the idea of the existence of omnipotence.
Well, Well, a rock would necessarily be part of the terrestrial realm, and God is a spirit, right? So, like, it would be that would be sort of an impossibility, right? Because that would mean that God would have to be contained within a frame that would be limited, and there because he's not part of the physical realm, he couldn't make a rock that he couldn't lift, right? He's always going to be able to. He can move continents, right? Because he's
Yeah.
outside of creation, right? He can
Yeah.
he can move all. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, uh, I don't think God can create a rock that he couldn't lift because
Okay. And
they're
then
two different realms.
a critic would say, so there's something God can't do. Therefore, he's not omnipotent.
Things that are logically absurd. I don't know. All right,
Okay.
but then the question about can God be in hell?
Yeah.
I mean, uh, I guess this comes down to the creation. Is creation separable from God? Does creation all different sort of dimensional realities that make creation, the layers of it, heaven, hell, and everything in between, right? Things are autonomous in
Mhm.
some way. If they're self-driving or if they necessarily need God to sort of recreate it at every moment. This sort of
Mhm.
I believe this is an idea called occurrentism or something like that. Let me look up the exact term.
Oh.
That about whether or not that's another sort of one of the issues I have with Kierkegaard saying that God is everything because
Mhm.
of some
Well,
of some issues.
they say a good attorney never asks a question he doesn't know the answer to, correct?
Mm-hmm.
So, I wouldn't have asked the question if I didn't have an answer.
Okay.
Okay. So, in years of debating this with myself and trying to figure out the answer, I realized it's that God can do whatever he wants to do, remember whatever he wants to remember, and be wherever he wants to be. Everything is contingent upon God's will and not upon our definition of him. So when we say God is omnipotent, it's really not that God can do anything, it's that God can do anything he wants to do. And when we say God is omnipresent, we're not saying that God has to be everywhere. We're saying that he is wherever he wants to be. Everything is contingent upon his will to be and do and know. Like when we say God knows everything, he's omniscient. It's really God knows whatever he wants to know and forgets whatever he wants to forget. So, see, in answer to the question, does God remember our sins even when we repent from them? The answer is no. Why? Because God has a will. He wills not to remember those things. So that doesn't take away from his divinity. It just merely adds the idea that God is a being and not an abstract uh, what would ideology. He's a being, and beings have will. That's the difference between an ideology and a being. So God is the judgment. Continuing on, is that God is the judgment, meaning that we will stand before Christ in comparison. He's the model by which we'll be judged. This is perhaps a little bit different idea than many people have of judgment. When we think of judgment, we think of the picture that the Bible gives us, standing before God, and he's going to listen to our story, and he's going to bring up what we've done, and then he's going to hammer the gavel down and say, well, I sentence you to eternity in hell. And this is kind of a little picture of it. But I think the way it's a closer resemblance to it is that Christ is the one, the image, the perfect model through which we will be judged. And what makes it through that model, that filter, so to speak, will go on to eternity. What does not will not make it to eternity. So, getting near to the conclusion here, the answer is that we must rest in God by being in his will. And this is what he calls his rest. This truly is a rest. So the seventh day idea of God created everything within 6 days, and on the seventh day he rested. This is symbolic of this eternal rest that we have when we come into the rest of being in God's will. So basically, since God is omniscient and unchangeable, all misunderstanding is mine. This is his quote. Pretty much the conclusion of this is that if God knows everything and he's unchangeable, then any misunderstanding between us has to be my fault. And therefore, I'm the one who has to go through the change and the transformation. And that pretty much wraps it up, Luke.
Pretty awesome. We talked about some pretty heavy stuff today. I'm while you were finishing up there, I started to go down the rabbit hole on this whole thing about, does God create the world anew each day? And I don't have a good answer for this, but it was a big issue in idealism for Descartes and others.
Yeah,
it's a very interesting idea to think about, because we're talking about whether or not like God made the world and then kind of let it do its thing, like it has the sort of the principles in it, and then versus the idea at every single moment he's making a new creation.
Yeah.
What do you think? Do you think at every moment, at every second that goes by?
Well, in physics, don't we study that atoms continue to move? Atoms. I mean, the world is not solid in the sense it appears to be. Everything is moving. So everything is continuing to be what it is, but it's changing it internally. It's still changing. Every electron isn't in the same position it was. Every atom isn't in the same position it was. We don't even have the same atoms that we started out with. So in that sense, there's truth to it. I think the world is continually recreating itself. Isn't that what healing is? Our bodies recreating themselves. So in that sense, I would agree.
Then we get these interesting conversations about theories of time and presentism and the block model of the universe. Oh man, Bob, this is crazy. I need to go and scrawl on the walls to work all these ideas out.
And the bathroom walls?
No, I got this great dry erase paint, and so I can write all over my walls and entertain very complex and wild ideas.
Oh, that sounds pretty good. I like that idea. Dry erase paint.
Yeah. But I also went insane in the process, so there's a trade-off.
Okay. So I think that the way I would kind of refocus this here about God's unchangeableness is, I think what he's talking about is the consistency of God's will. God wills consistently what he wants to will. We can't change his will. God changes his will, but only in the sense of he doesn't remember sin if we confess it. That's kind of a change, and things of that nature. So God's will is the same. It says God is the same yesterday, today, and forever is the actual biblical expression, but we need to understand what that means. God has, there was a situation that he changed his mind when he was going to destroy Nineveh. And then he sent, his plan was to destroy Nineveh. And he sends out our friend, Jonah. Thank you. He sends Jonah. And Jonah goes out and he goes through all this stuff, swallowed by a fish and so forth, spit out on land. And then he turns out that he goes to Nineveh and he turns him around. But he's angry with God because God said he was going to destroy Nineveh. And God said, no, you did such a good job. I'm not going to destroy Nineveh. And he was upset because he was going out telling them God's going to destroy you if you don't repent, and because he kind of put himself on the line there, his credibility on the line, since Nineveh wasn't destroyed, he he was upset. He was expecting it to be destroyed. And so people will say, well, God changed his mind. Yeah, he did. But that doesn't mean he's not immutable. It doesn't mean he is immutable. He's still, I'm sorry.
All right.
It doesn't mean he's mutable. It means he's still immutable because it's still his will that was done.
All right. So let me get this straight.
Yes.
Okay. So God is changeless because his will is always going to be his will. It's not going to be affected by anything outside of him. But we are changeable because our will can be externally impressed upon. And moreover, if we're going to talk about this idea of election and God working through people, so God could intercede in such a way to change our will, but we cannot intercede in such a way to change God's will. It's a one-way street of causal activity.
I think that's the underlying theme to it. I don't think that's the full understanding, and I don't claim I have the full understanding of God, but I think that's that.
What's wrong with you?
I don't know. Maybe next week. I need to read a few more books on it. But
just two more books and you'll have it figured out.
Yeah, I'm almost at the end of the network now, at the internet. I've almost read everything on the internet. I've just got a little bit more left.
Just a little bit more and you'll have it all figured out. Well, that was a great pre-show conversation we had and a great discussion of this text, and I hope everybody enjoyed it. Bob, would you like to say anything else in closing?
No, I didn't enjoy it though. I enjoyed talking about it. It was serious and it was kind of enjoyable at the same time. Hopefully people were able to separate the two. We kind of have fun in doing what we're doing, but there's a lot of seriousness to what we are doing. So please take it in that vein. Yeah.
But I mean, at the same time, philosophy, it should be a joy in life. Should be. Should engage every aspect of the mind. It should make us weep and make us laugh at the same time. Okay, so we're going to end this, and Bob, stay online a little bit so we can maybe figure out what we want to do next. Since I picked this essay, you should pick the next one. And thank you for listening, everyone. You can find us on the Noetic app later, the first version, and YouTube and SoundCloud. And I know I keep saying this, but we got a big upgrade coming. Blah blah blah. Results matter. But anyway, thank you, Bob, and I'll talk to everybody soon. Bye.
Okay. Bye-bye.